out on Lago di Riposatile and the landscape around. Here's Rieti in the background. And so most of the landscape today, if it's in agriculture, is in maize, in lucerne, or in wheat. Okay, so how do we do this? All right, we work off of a platform in the lake. We anchor it so that it's stable, and then we use handheld equipment to recover sediment cores out of the bottom of the lake. We use this kind of equipment because we're in fairly small lakes, because a small lake allows you to collect pollen, in our case, from an area which is fairly localized. So rather than collect from very large areas, we're collecting from a fairly small area and reconstructing the environment as it would have been in the near environments of the lake. So the cores are generally 1 meter long, okay, and we're taking them with this this tool called Livingston square rod piston pourer. And so we go down in the same hole at the same place continuously, 1 meter at a time, 1 meter at a time, 1 meter at a time. And so the cores come up, we extrude them out of the barrel into these plastic tubes, and then we store them in PVC pipe for transport. Some of the cores are worked on here in Italy and here in Viterbo and down in Rome, and some of the cores are sent to the United States where we work on them in a laboratory there. Okay, so we did our very first coring in 2008, just exploratory work to try and investigate which lakes might be most effective. Since then, we've taken cores every summer, and so in 2009 we took cores from Lago Lungo and Ventina. We returned in 2010 and took cores from Lungo and Riposatile, and now again last summer and this summer we've taken our cores, and so in the most recent work we've obtained our longest cores. We now have a 15-meter long core from Lungo, we have a 13-meter long core from Riposatile, and we have two 10-meter cores from Lago di Ventina, which we just took last week. I am going to focus most of my discussion this morning on Lago Lungo and the core taken in 2009, because we've done the greatest amount of work on that. And then Paula will talk more about some of the more recent cores and some of the additional work we're going to begin doing. So the work that I do and that Irene is working on focuses on pollen. And we're using the pollen that we're able to recover out of the sediments to try and reconstruct changes in vegetation. And so pollen has different morphological characteristics so that you can identify it to the family or the genus, and in a few cases, the species. This is a pretty complicated diagram, so I'm mostly showing this just so you get a sense of what our data look like. Typically, the way these are going to be presented is, this is depth over here, so that you can see that this core is extending down about 570 centimeters. These data are all represented as percentages, and all of the different taxa that we might have identified, and we identified more than 60 different taxa. They're presented here. And so, for example, we've got our Quercus here, Fagus here, Ulmus here. Over here we've got Boaceae, Carabaceae, Asteraceae, and then as we get out over here, there are ones that are called indeterminate, or they were too crumpled or too broken to be able to identify. So this is the sense of what we have, and I'm going to then walk through some details. Normally, the very first thing you try and do with these sediment cores is to develop a chronology. And in our case, it's particularly important that we have a chronology or age dating that is as precise as possible, because we want to compare our work with historical records. And the historical documents have actual dates. So, the typical use is radiocarbon. When we obtained our first radiocarbon date from the sediments on the surface, what we found was that they dated back about 1,000 years. This is bad. These should have dated to the year 2000. What that means is that there is a lot of old, or what we would call dead, carbon that is in our sediments that contaminates radiocarbon ages and makes it much more difficult to use radiocarbon to build a chronology. Okay? So that has been a challenge for us, and the first thing we had to do was to try and figure out what was a reasonable chronology for our sediments.